The sun was sinking low behind the tall acacia trees when little Abeni realized everyone had gone home. Her laughter long gone with the fading echoes of her classmates' voices, and the once lively school compound now stood empty and silent except for the whispering wind brushing through the dry grass. She sat on the dusty steps of her classroom, clutching her torn backpack, staring down the lonely road that led to her village, waiting for her parents, who, as usual, were too busy arguing to notice time slipping away. The janitor, an old man with weary eyes, walked past her, humming an old tribal song, unaware that the small girl sitting quietly was still waiting for someone who wouldn't come. And by the time he locked the rusty school gate and disappeared down the path, the sky had already turned purple and darkness began to creep in. Abeni tried to stay brave, remembering her grandmother's words, "A brave heart shines even when the moon hides." But the night in the African bush was not kind. Strange noises filled the air, distant drums, crickets chirping in unison, and the low growl of an unseen animal somewhere beyond the fence. She hugged her knees tighter and whispered to herself that Mama would come soon, but deep down, her heart trembled because Mama and Papa were known for forgetting things they had once left her at the market. Another time at church, and now at the lonely school on the edge of the village. Hours passed, and the moon rose high, throwing pale light over the broken desks and walls covered in chalk drawings. Shadows danced like spirits from the old tales her grandmother used to tell. Suddenly, she heard footsteps, soft but fast approaching from the far end of the compound. Her heart leaped. She thought maybe it was her father. But the figure that emerged from the darkness wasn't human. It was tall, covered in rags, its eyes glowing faintly like fireflies. Abeni froze, her tiny fingers digging into her skirt, her breath shallow, and the creature stopped, tilting its head as if studying her. She wanted to scream but couldn't. The stories about the night watcher, a spirit said to wander near forgotten children, flooded her mind. The figure stepped closer and whispered something in a language she didn't know, a deep, trembling sound that made the ground seem to shake. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it turned and walked toward the trees, vanishing into the shadows. Abeni's tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She felt cold and weak, but then, from behind her, a familiar voice called her name. It was the school teacher, Miss Cand, holding a lantern. "Abeni, my child, what are you doing here so late?" the woman gasped, pulling her into her arms. The teacher had returned after realizing Abeni's book bag was still on her desk. Trembling, Abeni tried to explain, but her words were lost between sobs. Miss Cand wrapped her shawl around her and whispered soothingly, "You're safe now," as they walked down the moonlit road back to the village. Abeni turned one last time toward the dark schoolyard and thought she saw those glowing eyes watching from the trees. The next morning, her parents rushed to the teacher's hut, guilt washing over their faces as they listened to what had happened. Her mother wept and promised never to forget her again. But Abeni couldn't shake the memory of that shadow in the dark. She knew something had been there, something that only came when a child was forgotten. The night after Abeni was found, the village buzzed with whispers, and while her parents argued endlessly about whose fault it was, Abeni sat quietly near the fire outside their mud house, staring into the flames as if they held the answers to what she had seen. The teacher's words had comforted her. But that pair of glowing eyes behind the trees haunted her dreams, following her into sleep like a shadow she couldn't escape. Her grandmother, Mama Nuru, noticed her silence and came closer, the wrinkles on her face deepening as she spoke softly. "Child, when a spirit looks at you, it leaves a mark, even if you don't see it." Abeni shivered, pulling her blanket tighter. She didn't want to believe in old stories, but deep inside, she knew something strange had happened that night. The next morning, when she returned to school, the children whispered behind her, calling her the Forgotten One, teasing that the night watcher might come again. Even Miss Cand looked worried as she noticed how pale and withdrawn Abeni had become. As the day ended, Abeni tried to walk home early, but something urged her to look back at the old mango tree near the school fence. There, hanging from one of its low branches, was a small charm made of feathers, beads, and animal bone, the kind used by the elders to keep spirits away. When she asked who placed it there, everyone claimed ignorance. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, strange things began to happen. The chickens refused to return to their coops, dogs barked at invisible things, and a foul wind blew through the huts, carrying with it whispers that seemed to call Abeni's name. Her father, annoyed, dismissed it as superstition, while her mother prayed softly, clutching a small wooden cross. But Mama Nuru warned them that the night watcher never left empty-handed when it came. It either protected or punished, depending on how the forgotten child was treated afterward. That night, Abeni woke to a soft humming sound outside her window, a tune eerily similar to the janitor's song from that fateful evening. Her eyes widened as she saw the faint flicker of blue light moving beyond the yard. She wanted to cry out, but curiosity outweighed fear. Slowly, she tiptoed out of bed, her bare feet cold against the clay floor, and peeked through the wooden cracks of the wall. In the distance, near the same mango tree, stood the tall shadow again, its outline illuminated by the moonlight. It wasn't alone. This time, tiny floating lights hovered around it like spirits of lost children. The air grew heavy, and the wind fell silent. Abeni's breath caught in her throat when she realized one of the lights was moving toward her, drifting softly until it stopped right outside her window. She could see a small face within the light, smiling, whispering her name as if calling her to come. Just then, Mama Nuru burst into her room, shouting her name and holding a bowl of burning herbs. The light scattered instantly, and the shadow melted into the darkness. Trembling, Abeni clung to her grandmother, tears streaming down her face. "You must never answer when they call," Mama Nuru warned, tracing protective symbols on her forehead. "They are drawn to your loneliness." Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it distant laughter that sent chills through the night. The next morning, Abeni's parents found the same protective charm now lying on their doorstep. The feathers burned and the beads cracked in half. For the first time, her father didn't argue. He simply looked at the hills beyond the village and whispered, "What have we done?" The following days wrapped Abeni's life in a heavy silence, for though the sun rose bright over the savannah and the laughter of other children filled the air, she felt something watching her from the unseen corners of the world. Even when she walked to school, she could sense the soft crunch of footsteps behind her that stopped whenever she turned, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward her like a hand reaching from another realm. Miss Cand noticed how restless the girl had become and decided to speak to her parents once more, urging them to pay attention to their child's fears. But her father brushed it off with tired eyes, claiming he had work to do at the fields. While her mother sighed that Abeni was just imagining things, only Mama Nuru believed, and she began to sprinkle ash and herbs around their hut at night, muttering prayers to keep away the restless spirits of forgotten children. One night, as thunder rolled across the plains and rain pounded hard against the thatched roof, Abeni woke again to the same humming sound, this time much louder, as if coming from inside the house. She sat up in bed, her eyes wide, her heart thudding fast, and saw something moving near the door, a dark mist swirling in the shape of a figure. From it came faint whispers, voices overlapping like 100 children crying at once, calling her name, begging her to follow. Abeni froze, but when the mist drifted closer, she heard one voice that made her blood run cold. It was the voice of her little brother, Kofi, who had died 2 years ago from fever. "Abeni," the voice whispered, "come play with me, ... I'm lonely." Tears welled up in her eyes. She wanted to run, but couldn't, her feet heavy like stones. The door creaked open by itself, letting in a gust of cold wind that blew out the small lamp beside her bed. Suddenly, Mama Nuru stormed in again, chanting old incantations, throwing handfuls of white powder into the mist. A loud shriek filled the hut as the dark figure recoiled, slamming the door shut with a bang. The fire in the hearth flared high, lighting the entire room in a deep orange glow, and for a brief moment, Abeni saw dozens of faces swirling within the smoke children, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. Then they vanished. Mama Nuru collapsed, exhausted, sweat dripping down her forehead as she gasped, "It's not just one spirit, child. It's many. The night watcher guards them." Abeni clung to her, crying silently, while outside, lightning split the sky, revealing the same shadow standing beyond the fence, its glowing eyes fixed on the hut. The next morning, when the rain had ceased and the earth smelled of wet dust, the villagers found strange footprints all around Abeni's home, long, thin, and clawed like no animal they knew. Fear spread like fire through the village, and the elders gathered beneath the baobab tree, debating whether the spirit had come to punish them all for their neglect of old traditions. They said that every time a child was forgotten, left behind, unloved or unseen, the night watcher appeared to remind the village of its lost humanity. Abeni's father, now shaken, dropped to his knees, begging for forgiveness as guilt tore through his heart, while her mother held Abeni close, whispering apologies through trembling lips. That night, for the first time, both parents stayed awake beside her bed, holding hands tightly as they listened to the faint cries of the night. Abeni, half asleep, wondered if the spirits could forgive those who forgot them more, if they would always return to take what was once theirs. The sun rose pale and weary over the village the next morning, casting long shadows that refused to fade, as if even the light feared what lingered in the hearts of the people. For the story of Abeni's haunting had spread from hut to hut like smoke on a windy day. Everyone whispered her name, some in pity, others in fear, and mothers now clutched their children tighter whenever dusk approached. Abeni, though surrounded by people, felt more alone than ever, her small hands trembling as she helped her mother grind maize outside, her mind replaying the face of her dead brother in the mist, his hollow eyes filled with sorrow. Her father had stopped laughing altogether, spending his days drinking palm wine under the old fig tree, hoping to drown the guilt that now clawed at his soul. That afternoon, Miss Cand arrived at their home carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were charms made by the village seer, meant to protect Ebony from the night watcher's call. The seer, an ancient woman named Binta, had seen terrible omens in her dreams, a child's spirit walking hand in hand with a shadow. She told them that the only way to end the curse was for the parents to seek forgiveness not from the gods, but from the forgotten souls themselves. That night, Mama Nuru prepared the family for the journey to the old riverbank, a sacred place where the villagers once performed the ritual of remembrance, lighting candles and calling out the names of the lost. As darkness fell, they walked through the tall grass, their lanterns swaying in the cool breeze, the sound of drums echoing faintly from distant huts. When they reached the river, the air felt heavy, and the moon hung low like a single watching eye. Mama Nuru instructed them to kneel by the water and speak Ebony's name aloud, then the names of all children they had neglected, forgotten, or wronged. For every forgotten soul was said to be bound to the night watcher's will. Trembling, Ebony's father confessed in a broken voice, recalling how many times he had ignored her cries, how many nights he left her waiting alone at school or home while he chased his own comfort. Her mother wept uncontrollably, her sobs mixing with the whispering wind. Suddenly, the river began to ripple, though there was no breeze, and a low hum rose from its depths. One by one, faint glowing lights began to appear above the water, forming shapes of small children, their faces calm yet sorrowful. Ebony's heart thumped wildly as one of the spirits drifted toward her, its translucent hand reaching for hers. Mama Nuru shouted for her not to move, but the girl couldn't resist. The touch was soft and cold, and in that instant, a vision flooded her mind. She saw the night watcher standing alone beneath the mango tree, watching over dozens of lost children, not with malice, but with mourning. He wasn't a monster, but a guardian of the forgotten, cursed to collect what careless hearts left behind. Tears streamed down Ebony's cheeks as she whispered, "I remember you." The lights flickered, and a deep voice echoed from the darkness. "Then my task is done." The water stilled. The lights faded, and silence filled the night. The family fell to their knees in awe, realizing the spirit had come not to harm, but to remind them of love forgotten. When they returned to the village, the air felt lighter, and for the first time in many nights, the dogs slept peacefully, and no whispers called from the dark. Yet, as Ebony lay in her bed, drifting towards sleep, she thought she saw, just outside her window, the faint outline of the night watcher bowing once before disappearing into the dawn mist. Days passed after the river ritual, and peace seemed to return to Ebony's home, though an invisible thread of unease still wove itself through the air like smoke that refused to clear. Her parents tried to make up for their past carelessness by walking her to school each morning, waiting for her after class, and surrounding her with affection she had longed for all her life. The villagers noticed the change and whispered that perhaps the gods had finally forgiven them. Yet, Ebony knew deep down that the night watcher's story wasn't over. She could still feel his gaze somewhere beyond the hills, patient and silent. One afternoon, Miss Cand sent Ebony and a few classmates to gather firewood near the old mango grove. And as the sun dipped low, painting the land in shades of gold and red, the other children ran ahead, laughing, leaving Ebony behind. She bent down to pick up a dry branch when she heard the faint humming again, the same haunting melody that had followed her since that night in the hut. She froze, her breath caught in her throat, and slowly looked up. Beneath the mango tree stood the night watcher, not cloaked in darkness this time, but bathed in soft light, his form clearer than before, a tall, solemn figure draped in tattered robes, his eyes like twin lanterns burning with sorrow. Fear mixed with strange calmness as Ebony whispered, "Why are you still here?" The spirit's voice echoed through the grove like wind through hollow bones, because not all forgotten ones have found peace. Before she could speak, the ground beneath the tree trembled, and dozens of faint silhouettes began to rise, small spirits of children, each holding a tiny glowing orb. They circled Ebony, their expressions gentle yet pleading, and one by one they whispered names of children who had gone missing over the years, whose stories were buried by time and silence. Ebony's heart ached as she realized these were not just spirits of her village, but of many forgotten souls across the land. The night watcher turned his gaze toward her and said, "You carry remembrance. Through you, their names shall live." Suddenly, a fierce wind blew, swirling dust and leaves around them, and Ebony saw visions flashing before her eyes, scenes of children left behind in empty schools, abandoned huts, lonely roads, all calling for love that never came. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, whispering each name aloud until her voice broke. As she spoke, each spirit faded gently into the wind, their light merging with the golden dusk. When the last one disappeared, only the night watcher remained, watching her in silence. Then, for the first time, he bowed his head to her, a gesture of gratitude, before turning into 1,000 fireflies that scattered across the grove, lighting the evening sky. Ebony sat there, breathless and trembling, realizing she had freed them. When she returned home, her parents listened in disbelief, but Mama Nero smiled knowingly. "The forgotten chose her," she murmured, "for only a child with a pure heart can bridge the world of the living and the lost." That night, the village gathered under the baobab tree to light candles for every lost child, speaking their names aloud, and from that night forward, it became a tradition. No child would ever be left behind or forgotten again. Yet, as the firelight danced in Ebony's eyes, she thought she saw one last flicker of the night watcher's light far beyond the trees, watching, waiting, guarding those who still lingered between worlds. Months passed, and Ebony's name became a song among the villagers, a tale whispered to children before sleep and spoken in gratitude during the evening fires. For it was said that she had faced the night watcher and taught her people to remember, to love, and to never leave a child unseen again. Yet, even as life returned to normal and laughter once more filled the dusty paths of the village, Ebony often found herself standing by the old mango grove, gazing at the place where the spirits had vanished, wondering if they still watched from somewhere beyond the mist. Her parents, transformed by guilt and redemption, became known for their kindness. Her father stopped drinking and built a small schoolhouse where no child would ever be left behind. and her mother started caring for the orphans from nearby villages, believing each one carried a fragment of the souls they had once forgotten. But in quiet moments, when the wind carried the soft hum of distant drums, Abeni would still hear the melody, the haunting lullaby of the night watcher, gentle now, no longer fearful, as if it had become part of her heartbeat. One evening, near the end of harvest season, the sky turned a strange shade of crimson as storm clouds gathered, and Abeni stood by the riverbank once more, the place where everything had changed. The reflection of the moon rippled across the water, and for a moment she saw the faint outline of children's faces smiling back at her. "Do you miss them?" Mama Nuru's voice asked behind her, soft and wise as always. Abeni turned, smiling faintly. "I think they're free now," she said, "but sometimes I feel they still come to watch over us." The old woman nodded, staring into the dark horizon. "They will always be near, my child. Spirits of the forgotten never truly leave. They become the wind that guides the living." As thunder rolled and fireflies began to rise from the tall grass, a strange calm filled the air. Suddenly, Abeni felt a gentle hand touch her shoulder, though no one stood behind her. Startled, she turned and saw a tall figure shimmering faintly in the distance, the night watcher, now radiant, his rags replaced by robes that glowed like moonlight, his eyes no longer hollow but kind. He raised one hand, as though in farewell, and Abeni, with tears glistening on her cheeks, did the same. Then, as lightning flashed across the plains, he dissolved into light, his form scattering into the heavens like countless stars being born at once. Abeni knew at that moment that his curse had lifted, his duty fulfilled through her compassion. She walked back to the village in silence, the cool rain washing over her feet, feeling both small and infinite, as though part of her now belonged to the same mystery that had once terrified her. Years later, when Abeni grew into a woman, she became the village's storyteller, gathering children around the fire to tell them about the night watcher not as a monster, but as a guardian spirit who reminded people never to forget love. Her stories traveled far beyond the borders of her land, and people from distant villages came to hear the girl who once faced the darkness and brought light to her people. And though many years passed, whenever a child was born in the village, they were given a blessing under the mango tree, and every night a single lantern was left glowing at the edge of the schooler, promise that no one would ever be forgotten again. On quiet nights, when the stars burned bright over the savannah, some villagers swore they still saw a faint figure walking near the tree, its lantern glowing softly in the dark, keeping watch. Abeni would smile when she heard such tales, for she knew the truth the night watcher had never left. He simply became part of the light that lived in every heart that remembered.